You're listening to WSUW 91.7 FM, The Edge, in Whitewater, Wisconsin. This is Rashkin Report, and I'm your host, Yuri Rashkin, and my guest is Slava Rabinovich, one of the most well-known and outspoken Russian bloggers. How important do you feel it is for America to play a big role, small role, or what role should it play in changing the regime in Russia?
Well, I first of all, back 2 years ago and a year and a half ago, I started talking about much more serious sanctions against Russia. I was really disappointed about the sanctions that were in fact implemented against the Putin's regime. These are sanctions not against Russia or Russian people. As President Obama and leaders of the European states stated numerous times, these are sanctions against Putin and his regime. And I believe that U.S. had a much bigger role to play in that versus what in fact happened. For example, Russia uses what I call a weapon of mass destruction. This is a state-controlled media. And in fact, Putin destroyed all media, all independent media in Russia. And all media in Russia is state-controlled. The brainwashing of Russian people and of the Russian population wasn't still going and still is such that I believe that none of the living generations of people have ever seen anything like that. And in fact, if you were to resurrect Goebbels and Hitler generation from their graves and have them investigate and research the propaganda machine and the brainwashing what was instituted in Russia 2 years ago and a year and a half ago and onwards, they would have been impressed and they would have regarded themselves as minor, like an elementary school versus a university. So why the United States have not implemented sanctions against major Russian media companies and against their criminal management? These companies and these management should have been under corporate and personal sanctions. You can institute so many other sorts of sanctions to inflict so much pain on the Putin's regime that you would probably had a palace coup d'etat or revolt among the Russian elite a long time ago.
Interesting. So you're saying that if we would have had more severe sanctions, then the Russian elite, whoever they are, would just rebel because that would be sufficient. So you're not advocating like military involvement or just to kind of counter the story about the the evil United States. You, Slava Rabinovich, are opposed to Putin's regime, and you're suggesting that America should be more involved, but through sanctions, not in any other way, really.
Well, military involvement has an inherent risk of a collateral damage in the form of a nuclear strike against the U.S. or Western Europe or U.S. interests anywhere around the world, and in fact, a risk of a third world war. But America did not use all of its measures much more ahead of any type of a military involvement in terms of sanctions, at least. And for example, there are sanctions against state-controlled and Putin-related companies. And there are sanctions against about 150 individuals in Russia who are among the closest Putin circle. What if the U.S. about 1 year ago started implementing sanctions against individuals? Let's say adding 200 people to the list every month until Putin was overthrown by his inner circle. Every single month, the United States add 200 people on the sanctions list. In 1 year, you would have had over 2,000 people on the sanctions list. You think that Putin would have still been in power? I don't think so. So there are so many ways for the U.S. to do more on that front, and this would have been in a direct national interest of the United States.
Well, let's see what happens, because now that there's more information about the plane that was shot down by the Russian troops or Ukrainian separatists, or I think it's now been named who the troops were, that there could be further sanctions. And I guess we'll just have to watch this and see how the situation develops. Slava, is there anything that you wanted to mention in conclusion as we wrap up this week's conversation?
Well, I believe you're completely correct in what you just said about the downing of the MH17 Malaysian Airlines Boeing plane on the 17th of July of 2014 over eastern Ukraine. The first report that was put out several months ago talked about how this plane was downed. The second report, which is yet to be published, will talk about who in particular downed that plane. And Putin will be named in the report as an ultimate commander-in-chief who ordered this military equipment to be illegally brought into eastern Ukraine and, in fact, used against Ukrainian forces. And whether they shot down this plane by accident, it doesn't really matter. It matters that this military equipment was not supposed to be brought from Russia into Ukraine and used there for any type of purpose, period. And regardless of who pulled the trigger, and these people will be named in the report as well, it is absolutely clear that it was brought into Ukraine from Russia on direct orders of the defense minister Shoigu and the president and the commander-in-chief Putin. And they will be both named in that report, and I just hope that the civilized world, including so many countries from which citizens of which died on that plane, will play a major role of bringing Putin and his thugs to justice.
You're listening to Rashkin Report.